One way to deal with the limitations of any data source is to integrate and compare data sources. So now I want to talk about some of the issues to bear in mind when doing that. First of all, things to consider when integrating data sources. One is whether there's a way to connect or join cases across data sources. For example, we might want to integrate data that relates to how people are using a given app on their phone and on their desktop computer and on a tablet, but we can only do that if there's a way to connect or join cases across those different devices. For example, a common login across all of those. If there isn't that type of common connector, then we won't be able to get the data for the same person across those different devices because we have no way to connect them. Another issue to consider when integrating data sources is whether all the cases are represented in both sources of data or in all the sources of data if there's more than two. For example, in some cases, we might have survey results that we're trying to integrate with behavioral data, such as how people are using an app or a website or something like that, but maybe only a fraction of the people have provided survey responses, whereas we have data for everyone for the app or the web usage. In that case, we want to be a little bit careful because we can't be sure that the results for the survey respondents will be the same in terms of the attitudinal data than the people who we have behavioral data for, but not attitudinal data. We also want to think about whether excluded cases differ from the included cases in systematic ways. So in that example that I just gave, if we do think that the people who responded to the survey are different than the people who don't, then anything that we look at in terms of how attitudes and behaviors relate to one another really only apply to the type of people who did the survey and don't necessarily apply to other people. Some things to consider when comparing results across data sources are whether variables have been defined the same way or can be made equivalent. One thing that's happening a lot now in organizations is that particular data points are bubbling up from two different parts of the organization or possibly even more, and the results appear to be conflicting. But very often in that sort of a situation, if you do sort of the forensics to figure out how those variables have been defined in the different parts of the organization, what appears to be a difference in a result is really a difference in how the variable has been defined. And once you resolve that, the results become much more similar. We also want to think about whether the populations and samples being compared are similar or whether they differ in systematic ways. And again, this is something that can happen a lot in different parts of an organization. Maybe one part of the organization has talked to people who came into a store, whereas another part of the organization has looked at customers who bought online or looked at all customers. All of those are slightly different populations, and so if we compare the result of one to the results from another, what might appear to be a difference in the first instance is really just a difference in the population as opposed to a difference in the result for the same population.